Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, November 10th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Kansas and their redistricting effort that they put forth at the request of President Donald Trump, now stalling across the state as the Republicans in the legislature take it off the docket for the special session set to take place. Now, this was news that broke roughly a week ago. We are just now getting around to it, largely because the 2025 elections coincided right when this news dropped. I think this was something that we actually saw on the same day of the election, and what it showed us was that the Kansas Republican Party, as much as Donald Trump has tried tirelessly to get the Kansas State Senate and the Kansas House moving forward and barreling towards a brand new congressional map, the Republicans right now just simply are at a halt. And it reminds me a lot of what we saw over in the state of Indiana, as Republicans were unable to capture in the necessary amount of votes as J.D. Vance, the sitting vice president, traveled to the state twice in an effort to redraw the state's congressional boundaries here, begging and pleading with the Republicans in the legislature in Indianapolis to ultimately say, we need a new map. And it wasn't because it is Democrats who are holding out in Kansas or Indiana. Republicans have a working supermajority in the state of Kansas, meaning that the incumbent Democratic governor, Laura Kelly, cannot veto any new congressional map. And Indiana, it's the same state, not a supermajority. I think there might be actually, but I do know Republicans have control of the state governorship there. So no real urgency on the side. The governor, too, has been quite adamant that he is willing to oversee a congressional redraw. But the point is that as we see Kansas really breaking up this decision and pushing back against the president, it's not because they have come to realize that, they don't want to do it just randomly. There's ulterior motives behind why they may not want to draw brand new congressional maps in Kansas. And I think there's a multitude of angles that we can go about in understanding it. The first one that I think is the most obvious, and one that I think is quite important in really just understanding Kansas at baseline, is that while Republicans do have the working majority, the supermajority in the state of Kansas, as it comes down to, what matters to voters in this state, there are still a sizable portion of voters in the state of Kansas on the Republican side that would not be super willing to re-elect many of these Republicans in 2026 if they were to redraw the boundaries here. There actually are quite a few moderate Republicans who come from the outskirts of major cities in Kansas, and they know that the electoral repercussions, especially looking at the 2025 results, could be quite severe, as Republicans quickly learned in the state of Virginia, going from Democrats having a one-seat advantage in the state legislature to Democrats being 3 seats away from a supermajority in the state of Virginia. And the reason I say that is because I know that these Kansas Republicans are hyper aware of how races are changing and being pulled out from the Republicans, because it does take Democrats, if they are to crack this supermajority in the Kansas state legislature, it would make it so any future Democratic governor could veto any of the decisions from the Kansas House. And so why run that risk all in an effort to really change one congressional district? Because the fight in Kansas is not about a toss-up seat, a likely seat, and a safe Democratic seat. It's about 3 safe Republican seats and 1 seat that Kamala Harris won in the last election by 4 points. Stands to reason that under better circumstances, the Democrats could in fact lose this race. But Democrats have an exceptionally strong candidate in Sharice Davids in this district. She is a Democrat who has done historically very well, and they actually tried to draw her out in 2022 after 2020 when she won by 10 points. They included much more conservative parts of the state, and yet in 2022, she won by 12, and then in 2024, outran Kamala Harris by 7 points across the district. And so why that matters is because they see her as this constant threat holding up 1/4 of the entire state's total delegation. And the Republicans in the state legislature don't want any Democrats representing them in Washington, D.C. Now, the flip side of why they also might be concerned doesn't just have to do with Republicans in the state legislature being worried they might lose re-election. Sharice Davids, the Democrat here, who is exceptionally popular and a consistent overperformer, has briefly floated the idea that if Republicans draw her out of Kansas's 3rd district, that she would run statewide for United States Senate. And while that may not be something that, would have been entirely the best case for her, I think she'd be more likely to lose it rather than win it. It wouldn't be 1,000% out of the realm of possibility, given the way that many of these states are trending. I don't think it'd happen, but it would force Republicans to play defense, spend money on a state they otherwise would not want to spend money on, and Sharice Davids could pull a Laura Kelly, when in 2018 she defeated Chris Kobach at this time, who was serving, actually primaried the Republican incumbent governor who had been brought up because of Donald Trump's appointment of Sam Brownback. Brownback was exceptionally unpopular, but Chris Kobach in this state, I believe at the time was Secretary of State, yes he was, had won statewide before, but became the Republican nominee for governor. But he was unpopular. Voters didn't like him, and Laura Kelly, who many people saw on the Democratic side and said, oh, well, she's just a state senator, how well could she actually do? And although she might have been, in this position where it was certainly a toss-up and back and forth in the polls, she ended up winning by roughly 5 points. And I think that the Republicans know that they are fearful of something like this happening in Kansas. I don't think it would be the likeliest outcome at all. But looking at the last presidential, Kansas did vote for Donald Trump by a pretty significant amount. Don't get me wrong, he won the state by 16 points. But I think they remember that in 2020, he won the state by 14.6, and in 2016 won the state by 21. Relative to the nation, Kansas has been a state that has actually gotten bluer relative to how the popular vote has gone. So when you think about in margin here, for instance, in 2016, Hillary Clinton is winning the national popular vote by 2.5. He wins it by 20.5. That's roughly here a 23-point swing to the right relative to the nation. In 2020, it ends up being a state that voted Trump plus 14.5, but Biden was winning nationally by 4.5, and that puts you at 19 points right to the nation. And then in 2024, Trump wins the state by 16, and you can see these margins inch and inch. And that means if Donald Trump won nationally by 1.5, Kansas was only 14.5% more Republican than the nation. And so that means that in the wildest of circumstances, which might not seem super probable, but when you think about what happened in the first midterm that Donald Trump was president, even in neighboring states, but you can see it in Kansas as a better example. Many of these districts, the most competitive one was Republican plus 11. 2 years later in 2018, Democrats and Sharice Davids takes a Republican plus 11 district, meaning that district relative to the nation was 13 points more Republican, and she won it by 10. And that neighboring district, Jenkins held it by 28 in 2018, only went to the Republicans by one singular percentage point. 28 versus 1 point, same district, no new boundaries, no real changes, and I think that terrifies the Republican Party. And so their effort here in Kansas coming to a halt shows that for whatever reason that it is, the Kansas Republicans are not as gung-ho as it initially seemed when this was being first floated. The Kansas Republicans had come out in full support that they were going to override the veto of Laura Kelly, and they were going to do what they needed to get a brand new congressional map across the finish line. But then Sharice Davids, rather than say, I'm going to run for governor, I'm going to run for something else, their biggest fear here was that she would embark on a journey that if she was able to swing a district 20 points to the left, it stands to reason that if that appeal replicated itself, I mean, Kansas is only 4 districts here. You're talking about just 4 times the operation for a race that is 1,000 times more consequential. And so I think that the Republicans knew that Sharice Davids, even if she was never going to win, was going to force the spending of money in races just like they fell for in 2020 when they spent countless dollars on that race on the Republican side. Democrats did too, but I am not lost on the amount that we saw raised by Roger Marshall in this race. Let's see if we can actually find it here. I don't know if they've published the data on Wikipedia. But when you look at some of the races here and how much they actually spend, I'd be very interested to see if there's an open secrets link somewhere around here. But in either case, what you're looking at is that, oh, that's funny. What you're looking at here is that the Republicans were forced to play defense here. And the prediction said, you're in a pretty close race. Now, obviously, ended up winning, but by 12 points. Donald Trump was winning this state, again, by 15, right? And when you think about it 4 years prior and any other election like 2014, you're not talking about Greg Orman ran as an independent, but even Democrats didn't even contest it in 2014. Even in 2008, a phenomenal year for the Democrats, Jim Slattery, who was running in this race, who at the time, I believe, he was served as a U.S. representative, got about 36% of the vote. And so I think Republicans realize that on the calculus level, that getting Sharice Davids out of Congress, which wouldn't even have been a guarantee, would not even be a guarantee given how much she is an overperformer, is not worth the risk of what she might decide to do given her political capital in the state. Because there aren't that many Democrats who do well in Kansas. But she absolutely would be one of them. And the Republicans, seemingly after the election results on Tuesday, are terrified of what the results might bring. Are terrified of what a future election might look like if Democrats get this stellar candidate, which it very much looks like they could if the House goes awry. And you're seeing it happen in Indiana too, not to the degree that they're afraid of a statewide race. Don't get me wrong, Indiana Republicans don't really have much to fear when it comes down to the governor elections that coincide with presidential elections, but I think for the Secretary of State's race, it's a very different case there. I think that one could certainly be competitive. But again, getting back to this point about why Republicans might be halted, I think that they are also quite fearful of what the Democrats might launch onto them as well. Because in Virginia, seemingly coming out of nowhere, being a state that could offer up Democrats an additional 3 seats, 4 seats across the country, I mean, you are talking about an unfathomable gerrymander in favor of the Democrats, and they're willing to do it because Republicans would never second guess it. But in Kansas, it isn't that this is some type of moral point. It is true fear you see in the eyes of the Kansas Republicans, whether it is those that are gunning for re-election or a race that they are fearful about their party's odds at re-election. And even when it comes down to what this would do on the national level, is that 1 seat really worth it at the expense of the tens of millions they will have to spend on the Senate race in Kansas? And possibly, too, Sharice Davids could jump ship and decide to run for governor, to which she probably would win that governorship, given her reach not just in the district, but across the state. And what that could mean, too, is if Republicans end up losing that governing supermajority, this Democratic veto could actually make a difference. Democrats control the Kansas Supreme Court. They have agency over a lot of this state because of it. And it also is true that Kansas voters, while seemingly, yes, conservative, and more in favor of Trump than Kamala Harris, no doubt about that, to the degree that they are socially more conservative, not enough that Sharice Davids would need to be fearful about a governor election in the state. So there's a very, very big risk calculus here from the Republicans who look at this and say, all right, maybe now is not the right time. Because it isn't. Democrats are set to do phenomenally well in 2026, and even they can read the writing on the wall. And as the Republican Party has promised, they would steamroll state after state after state. It looks like they are running very quickly out of options. Missouri is done, North Carolina is done, but with Prop 50 passed in California, they've netted just 2. After months of trial and tribulation, you've seen that the Republicans have only netted 2 seats, meaning that in 2026, Democrats instead are working from a deficit of 220 to 215, but rather are working at a deficit of 222 to 213, the exact margin that Republicans had after 2022. But a very substantial difference in margin compared to what the Democrats were up against in 2016. And if they could take a House map from what was Republicans at 241 and the Democrats at 194 and completely flip it on its head and bring it to a point where the Democrats are winning 235 seats and the Republicans 200, you'll see this too. It is entirely reasonable to believe that even with this 2-seat gain, Ohio is nullified, right? California and Texas nullify each other. Missouri and North Carolina are added in for. This really isn't changing much. And it is a complete fall off from what could have been a total disaster for the Democratic Party based off what the initial redistricting looked like had the Democrats not fought back. And I think the Republicans truly in in Kansas, and partially maybe too in Indiana, are fearful of what the wrath might look like should they decide to do a congressional redraw. And I think the Democrats have made a successful enough case, at least to those who call these shots and make these votes, that there is an energy and enthusiasm that exists on the Democratic side that does not on the Republican side. And that many of these Republicans who truly believe they are not vulnerable are, in fact, vulnerable. And there could be many sleeper races in 2026, just as there were in Donald Trump's first term. So I'd implore you to watch. Watch closely as these states navigate a very difficult situation to be in, but one nonetheless that will likely end up with not much movement happening between now and November of 2026. Barring a change in Section 2 of the VRA, our House maps are largely set, and any type of momentary impact that might be made continuously in Kansas, in Florida, will likely be nullified too by the impending decision out of Virginia, to which we will probably see that by the end of it, both parties come out around net even, which is a phenomenal result for the Democratic Party that is already expected to do quite well in this upcoming midterms House elections in 2026. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.